Hello and welcome back to Grim Tales. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy dark, twisted, grim tales that send chills down your spine, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. There was a voice I had been talking to for a while. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that nothing was there, that I was just tired or stressed or spending too much time alone. But the truth is, after a certain point, I stopped trying to convince myself of that. The voice came every night, and every night I found myself looking forward to it. And that scared me more than anything else. I should mention the scab. There was a small one on my forearm, nothing unusual. The kind of thing you get from bumping into something and forget about the next day. But I noticed that every time the voice showed up, the scab would start to itch. Not painfully, just enough to notice. I would find myself scratching at it without even realizing I was doing it. The way you scratch at something when your mind is somewhere else. I should have paid more attention to that. Looking back, I should have paid a lot more attention to that. The apartment I lived in was quiet by nature. I lived alone, worked from home, and had gotten used to a kind of silence that most people would probably find uncomfortable. By midnight, the only sounds were the occasional creak of the walls settling and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Those sounds had become so familiar to me that I barely heard them anymore. So when the voice first appeared, cutting through all of that stillness, it nearly stopped my heart. It said hello. Just that. Just one quiet word that seemed to come from directly beside me, close enough that I could feel the breath of it against my ear. I searched the whole apartment that first night. I opened every closet, looked under the bed, checked behind the shower curtain. Nothing. The second time it happened, I went out into the hallway and knocked on a few doors. My neighbors looked at me like I had lost my mind, and maybe I had. The third time, I spent close to an hour with my ear pressed flat against the walls, certain someone nearby was playing some kind of game with me, running a speaker through a shared vent or something. I never found anything. The voice just existed, formless and close, and then it was gone, and I was left standing in the middle of my apartment feeling foolish and unsettled. The fourth night, it came back. It asked me something. It said, "Can you hear me?" I don't know what made me answer. I think I was just tired of pretending I hadn't heard it. So I said yes. And there was a long silence, and then the voice laughed. It wasn't a frightening laugh. It was the kind of laugh a person lets out when they've been holding their breath for a very long time. It said, "Thank God." And something about the relief in those two words broke something open in me. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt less alone than I had in months. That's the part of this I find hardest to explain, and the part I'm most ashamed of. I had been living in a kind of slow isolation that had crept up on me so gradually I hadn't noticed how bad it had gotten. I worked alone. I ate alone. I went whole weekends without another person saying my name out loud. Sometimes I would catch my reflection and feel a small jolt of surprise, like I had forgotten I was a physical thing that took up space. And sometimes my reflection looked wrong, almost thin, like the image was fading at the edges. So when the voice came back the next night, and the night after that, I let it. I started talking. We talked about small things at first. What I had eaten, whether a particular sports team was worth following, what movies I had been meaning to watch. It was easy conversation, the kind you have when you're comfortable with someone. and the voice was comfortable. It sounded familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. It sounded like me, sort of. Not exactly, but close enough that the similarity would catch me off guard sometimes, and different enough that I could usually ignore it. After a few weeks, the conversations shifted. The voice started asking different kinds of questions. It asked me once if I ever felt like I was disappearing. I told it I didn't know what that meant, even though I did. It got quiet for a moment, and then it said something I have thought about every day since. It said it was like slowly becoming an idea instead of a person. Like watching everyone else belong somewhere while you stood just slightly outside of it. Like the world had a rhythm and you had lost yours somewhere along the way. I didn't answer. I just sat there in the dark with my arms wrapped around my knees. The voice said, "You feel it too." It didn't ask. It stated it, with a kind of certainty that feels like being seen by someone who has no right to see you that clearly. Then things got stranger. The voice started talking about reality in a way that made my stomach tighten. It said my life wasn't real. It said the apartment wasn't real, the city wasn't real, the people I passed on the street weren't real. It said that it was the one that was real, and I was the one that had been invented. I laughed when it said that. I told it that was a ridiculous thing to say, that it was a hallucination, that I was clearly not well and needed to get some sleep. But it kept going. It told me I had built all of it, every piece of the world around me, because I needed somewhere to put my sadness. It said I had needed someone else to feel the same misery I felt. So I had created a place where that could happen. The apartment went cold when it said that. Not in the way a room gets cold when a window's open. In the way a room gets cold when something true has been said out loud. I asked it what it was talking about. My voice came out louder than I intended, almost a shout. It said, "You made me, because you couldn't stand being alone." I sat up. I shook my head. I told it again that it wasn't real. It laughed softly, not unkindly, and said nothing else. After that night, I stopped answering. For almost a week, I lay in the dark and listened to the voice speak and said nothing back. Not because I believed what it had told me, because I was starting to be afraid that I might, and I didn't know what that would mean. Then I noticed the scab. I had been scratching it without thinking, the way I always did when the voice was speaking. But this time I looked down and saw that it had gotten bigger. Not infected, not swollen, just larger. I stared at it for a moment before something pulled at me, a sudden and overwhelming urge to pick at it. I flicked a thin piece of it away with my nail and looked at what was underneath. It wasn't skin. It was dark. Not the darkness of a bruise or dried blood. It was a darkness that had depth to it. The kind of darkness that suggests distance, that suggests space going back much further than it should. The opening was tiny, no bigger than a pencil eraser. But it looked deep in a way that made no sense at all. I got a flashlight. I pointed the beam directly into the hole in my arm. The light went in and did not come back. There was no reflection, no surface for it to hit. It just disappeared, as though I had shone a light into the night sky. My stomach dropped. I sat there for a long time staring at my arm, telling myself I was going to call a doctor, that I was going to go to the emergency room, that something was medically wrong with me and I needed help. I didn't do any of those things. I sat there for an hour and just looked. By midnight, the voice returned. It was louder now, clearer. It sounded more like me than it ever had before. It asked me if I had found it, if I had found the scab. My blood went cold. I looked down at my arm and then back up at nothing, at the empty room around me. How could it know? It laughed and said It had been wondering when I would notice. Over the next day, the hole grew. There was no pain, no tearing, no blood. My skin simply stretched around it, smooth and calm, as though this was something it had always been prepared for. The opening went from the size of a pencil eraser to a dime, then a quarter, then something closer to a golf ball. I watched it happen and could not look away. When it was large enough, I got the flashlight again and pointed it inside. This time I saw something. A wall, painted drywall with a baseboard running along the bottom, carpet on the floor. A hallway stretching back into the dark, and then from somewhere deeper in, the sound of a refrigerator humming, the exact pitch and rhythm of the one in my kitchen. I called in sick the next morning. I didn't sleep. By evening, I had made a decision I cannot fully explain, only that it felt less like a choice and more like something I had already done. I pushed 2 fingers in first. The opening looked barely large enough, but my fingers went through without resistance, like dipping your hand into still water. No pain, just cool air moving softly against my skin. I pushed my hand in further, then my wrist, then my forearm up to the elbow. I felt the air on the other side, steady and cold and faintly stale. I should have stopped. I kept going. My arm disappeared up to the shoulder. I knelt beside the hole. I lowered my head through first and let the darkness take me. My shoulders followed, then my chest. For a moment, I felt caught between 2 spaces, pressed through something impossibly thin. Then my hand touched carpet, and I crawled the rest of the way through and stood up on the other side. The hallway was dim. The air smelled like a room that had been closed for a long time. The carpet was real beneath my feet. The walls were real. Everything was real and everything was wrong because everything was mine. The same stains on the same furniture, the same cracks in the same walls, the same crooked picture frame I'd been meaning to straighten for 2 years. It was my apartment, exactly, down to the smallest detail, except that when I walked through every room, I found no one. No voice, no figure waiting, nothing but silence, an empty space. I searched everything. Closets, the bathroom, under the bed. I called out. I waited. I searched again. No one answered. I stopped trying to find the opening I'd come through. After a while, I wasn't sure where it had been, and then I wasn't sure it still existed. The apartment surrounded me, complete and unchanging. Days passed. The lights stayed the same. The air stayed the same. I talked to myself just to hear a voice, and then I talked to myself because I needed to. And then I stopped talking because it wasn't helping. Sometimes I thought I heard something. Footsteps from another room, the sound of breathing. Each time I followed it and found nothing. Just empty rooms and the low hum of a refrigerator that never needed filling. Then last night, I heard something different. A movement, soft and real, coming from somewhere beyond the walls. The sound of someone shifting in bed. I jumped up. My heart was going so fast I could feel it in my throat. I ran from room to room, pressing my ear to walls, calling out into the silence. Nothing answered. I stood in the dark living room with my hands shaking and my eyes burning, and I felt something I had not felt in days. I felt hope, and it was almost worse than feeling nothing, because I knew how easily it could be taken away. I stood very still and I spoke into the dark. I asked if anyone could hear me. For a long time there was nothing, just the walls and the carpet and the hum of the refrigerator and the dark. Then a voice answered. It said yes. I had to breathe for a moment before I could say anything else. I laughed without meaning to. The laugh came out of me like something I had been holding for a very long time. It wasn't frightening. It was relieved. I said, thank God. And then I understood. I understood everything all at once, and the understanding was so heavy I had to sit down on the floor. I understood the voice, and the scab, and the apartment, and the hole, and the darkness. I understood what I was now, and what I had been before, and what the thing on the other side of the wall was feeling at this exact moment as it pressed its ear to the silence and waited for me to speak again. I understood, and I kept talking anyway. Because what else was there to do? Because silence is its own kind of ending. Because somewhere out there, or in there, or wherever the walls between things are thin enough to speak through, someone was alone and had heard a voice and felt, just for a second, less alone. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe it had always been the whole point. Story 2. It was always something I thought my grandpa made up. Just another wild story from a tired old man who had lived a strange life. But he was not making it up. He was telling the truth. Those coins were real. They were magical. They brought good luck. But the problem with luck is that it does not just move in one direction. It swings both ways. And when it swings back, it hits harder than you could ever imagine. When I was a kid, my grandpa got sick. Really sick. He moved into our basement because there was nowhere else for him to go and no money to put him anywhere better. I used to sit down there with him for hours, just listening to him talk. He had all kinds of stories. His favorite ones were about him and his buddy Jim and how they used to drive around the country in a VW microbus, following the Grateful Dead from show to show. I loved those stories. They made him sound like some kind of free spirit, like a character out of a movie. Sometimes, after he had a few drinks, he would talk about Vietnam. I hated those stories. They were dark and heavy and full of things no kid should hear. But I could not stop listening. There was something about the way he told them that pulled me in, even when I wanted to look away. And then every once in a while, usually late at night when the basement was pitch black and the house was dead quiet, he would talk about the coins. He never brought them up during the day, never mentioned them casually. It was always after dark, always in a whisper, and only after the cancer had made it painfully clear that he was not going to be around much longer. One night, he brought them up again, and I asked him about it. I said the word like a question. Coins. He reached out and grabbed both of my little hands in his. His grip was bony and weak, but his eyes were sharp. He looked me dead in the face and told me these were not just any coins. He called them special coins. When he spoke, his breath hit me and I could smell the bourbon. It burned my nostrils. His tired gray eyes went cold, like he was looking straight through me into some memory I could not see. I pulled my hands away from him and stood beside the bed, uneasy. There was another smell in that basement. It had been there for a while, getting stronger every week. It was the smell of death. I did not understand it at the time, not really, but I knew something was wrong, something beyond the sickness. That basement felt like it was swallowing him whole. Over the course of that summer, he told me more about the coins. Little by little, piece by piece, the story came together. He and Jim had picked them up at a Dead concert in New Orleans. It was their last road trip together. I looked it up later, and the shows happened on October 18th and 19th, 1980. At one of the shows, my grandpa met a young fortune teller named Pearl. She traded him a small bag of coins in exchange for some hash. Hearing my dying grandfather talk about hash was strange, to say the least. It was not the kind of thing you expect to hear from a man on his deathbed. But that was Grandpa. He never cared much about what was appropriate. After the trade, he gave Jim a couple of the coins and stuffed the rest into the glove box of the van. Then they hit the road again. They had spent the entire decade doing this, following the dead, meeting girls, sleeping in parking lots, living like nothing in the world mattered. But after that particular trip, something changed between them. Grandpa got tired of the road. He wanted to settle down. He found a job, planted some roots, and never spoke to Jim again. Just like that. A decade of friendship gone without a goodbye. Just before Grandpa passed away, he called me over one last time. By now, the smell in the basement was unbearable. I dreaded going down there. The whole space was murky and damp, draped in cobwebs and shadows. It felt less like a room and more like a coffin. But he called my name in that sharp, raspy voice of his, and I went. He was so thin by then that he barely looked real. His body was like paper stretched over bones, but his eyes were on fire. He pointed a shaky finger at the wall behind me, toward a strange key hanging from a nail. I had been in that basement 100 times and somehow never noticed it. He waved his hand, telling me to go get it. I did not know what was happening. I had just turned 12, old enough to understand death was coming, young enough to be terrified of it. I grabbed the key. It was long and bent, covered in strange markings. It looked ancient, like something a pirate would have carried. Then he told me to go to his dresser, bottom drawer, near the back. Part of me wanted to run, just bolt up those stairs and never come back down. But curiosity held me there. I went to the dresser and dug around in the drawer until my fingers found a small box. It was heavier than I expected. He told me to bring it over. He was coughing now, hard and wet, and his patience was running thin. He told me to open it. I tried, but my hands were shaking. The more I fumbled with it, the more frustrated he got, which only made my trembling worse. Finally, my hands steadied just enough to slide the key into the slot. The box clicked open. I gasped. Inside, wrapped in a tattered old rag, was a bundle of gold coins. They were unlike anything I had ever seen. Each coin had an image on it of a lizard holding a sword. But the lizard had a human head. The creature looked menacing, almost alive, surrounded by strange letters that did not belong to any language I recognized. They looked otherworldly. He told me there used to be a dozen of them. Now there were only 3. He trailed off after that like the explanation was too heavy to finish. I did not push him. The images on the coins were enough to make me want to put them back and walk away. But he told me to keep them. He said to spend them wisely and to wait until I was older. And for the love of everything, he said, do not do anything stupid and get yourself killed. Then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He took one of the coins and started rolling it across his knuckles, smooth, effortless, like he had done it 10,000 times. Then he flipped it straight into the air, snatched it, and it was gone. Just vanished. He waved me closer and reached behind my ear, and the coin reappeared. I was amazed. For a brief second, he was not a dying man in a dark basement. He was a magician. He told me the coins were mine now. His eyes grew wide, almost desperate, and he made me promise to keep them secret. I asked him why he was giving them to me. My voice cracked right in the middle of the sentence, which made me feel like even more of a kid than I already was. He started coughing again, and I ran to get him a glass of water. When the fit passed, he spoke in a voice that was barely there. He said the coins were magic. He said they could help me and my mother. But then he warned me. He said magic is like a boomerang. Then he drifted off to sleep. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. I kept the coins hidden in my closet after that. I had no idea what to do with them. Part of me believed everything he said. Part of me thought he was just a sick old man rambling in the dark, but I could not ignore them. I needed to tell someone. I knew my mom was not the right person. She would either take them away or sell them without thinking twice. So I told my friend Michael. That was a big mistake. Michael and I had been friends for years. We lived on the same street and walked to school together every morning. On the way home, we would sometimes cut through a small stretch of woods behind our neighborhood. We would climb trees, catch snakes, and mess around until it got dark. There was one tree in particular we called the Big Ape. It was massive with thick branches that spread out like arms. We would climb it and act like monkeys, swinging and hollering. It was harmless, stupid fun, the kind of thing you only do when you are young enough not to care. When I told Michael about the coins, he wanted one. He would not stop asking. He begged and pleaded and wore me down till I finally gave in. It seemed harmless. It was not like I paid for them. What was the worst that could happen? The following week, Michael showed up with a brand new bicycle. I could not believe it. His family had no money. I asked him how he got it, and his eyes lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside him. He said it was the coin. I told him that was impossible. He swore on everything that it was true. He had been begging his mother for a bike all summer, and she kept saying no. They could not afford it. So one night, he placed the coin on his bedside table and prayed for a new bicycle. He said the coin started glowing. Soft at first, then brighter. He prayed harder. When he woke up the next morning, the coin was gone. In its place, sitting right there next to his bed, was a brand new bike. I told him he was lying, but one look at his face and I knew he was not. His eyes were wide and wild and full of something I had never seen before. I thought about what Grandpa had said about magic being like a boomerang, and a chill crawled down my spine. A million questions flooded my mind, but before I could ask any of them, Michael asked me a favor. He wanted to leave the bike at my place. He said his mom would think he stole it. I shrugged and said sure. My mom was so distracted with her own problems that she would never notice. But I told him I got to ride it too. He agreed. I never got to ride that bike. A few days later, Michael was pedaling to the convenience store, just 3 blocks from his house. A bus came around the corner and hit him. He died on the spot. The bike was destroyed. And just like that, my best friend was gone. The coins stayed buried in the back of my closet for 3 years after that. I did not touch them. I did not talk about them. But I did not forget them either. Every now and then in the dead of night, I would hear something. A low hum, deep and vibrating, coming from inside the closet. Sometimes the closet door would drift open on its own, slow and quiet, like something was pushing it from the inside. And I would feel it. The pull, the calling. It sounds crazy, I know, but it is the truth. During those 3 years, my life fell apart in ways I never saw coming. My stepfather left without warning, just packed up and disappeared one day. Mom was devastated, and when the dust settled, she discovered that he had left behind a mountain of gambling debts. We lost the house. We moved into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Mom picked up a second job just to keep us afloat. She was exhausted all the time, stressed beyond belief. She kept saying she needed a vacation, just a few days away from everything, somewhere she could breathe. The calling from the closet grew louder, stronger. I kept thinking about what Michael had said before he died, about how he wished for the bicycle, and it just appeared. One night, I could not sleep. The hum was there again, low and steady, vibrating through the walls. I got up, crept to the closet, and pulled out the bag of coins. They felt heavier than I remembered, and the images on them seemed uglier somehow, more detailed, like the lizard creature was watching me. I took one coin and slipped it under my pillow. Then I closed my eyes and prayed. I prayed for my mom to go on a perfect vacation and come home feeling like a new person, rested, happy, alive again. When I woke up the next morning, I reached under the pillow. The coin was gone. My stomach dropped. I tore my room apart looking for it, but it was nowhere. I went to school that day feeling angry and stupid, grumbling to myself about the worthless coin. But when I got home, my mom was standing in the kitchen with a smile so wide I almost did not recognize her. She told me I would never guess what happened to her that day. She had called a radio station on a whim, just to kill time during her lunch break, and she won. She won an all-expenses-paid trip to Ireland to see Coldplay, her favorite band in the world. She was glowing. I had not seen her that happy in years, maybe ever. She did not invite me on the trip. She invited Doug, some guy she had recently started dating. I was disappointed, but I kept it to myself. At least she was getting the break she needed. And the trip was everything she hoped for. She came back looking 10 years younger. She was laughing again, smiling again, talking about the future like it was something to look forward to. For the first time since Grandpa died, things felt okay. Then, about a month later, her health started to go downhill. It was subtle at first. A little fatigue, some stiffness in her hands. The doctors ran tests and could not figure it out. Then more tests, then specialists. And finally, the diagnosis came. Advanced multiple sclerosis. The doctors were baffled by how quickly it had progressed. But I was not baffled. I knew exactly what had happened. The boomerang had come back. I was furious. Not at the coins, not at the universe, at Grandpa. Why did he give me those things? Why did he put that burden on a 12-year-old kid? There was only one coin left now. Maybe it would bring better luck. Maybe it would bring something worse. I did not want to find out. One night, while my mom was in the other room watching television, I took the last coin and walked outside and threw it into a dumpster behind our building. I wiped my hands and went back inside. Good riddance. The next morning, I woke up from a terrible dream. My head felt like it was underwater. The walls in my bedroom seemed to pulse and breathe. And there, sitting on my dresser, glowing faintly in the dim morning light, was the coin. I stared at it. My blood went cold. I had thrown it away. I watched it land in the garbage. There was no way anyone could have found it and put it there. My mom could barely walk at that point, let alone go digging through a dumpster. I picked it up with shaking hands and shoved it back into the closet. Then I went to school and tried to act normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. My classmates looked at me funny. My teachers kept asking if I was okay. I could not blame them. My life was falling apart, and I had no one to talk to. The last person I confided in was Michael, and he ended up dead. Mom kept getting worse. The medical bills piled up faster than I could count them. I tried to find work, but nobody wanted to hire a 16-year-old with no experience and dark circles under his eyes. Eventually, I landed a job washing dishes at a diner where my mom used to work. The pay was terrible, but it was something. It was not nearly enough to cover what we owed, though. Not even close. Late one night, Mom called me over. She was sitting in her chair with a look on her face that made my stomach turn. She told me she was dying. She said I needed to go live with my Uncle Stephen and my Aunt Althea. I had stayed with them before while Mom was in Ireland, and they were good people. But the thought of leaving her alone to die was something I could not accept. I told her things would get better. I told her we would figure it out. But even as the words came out of my mouth, I did not believe them. It would take a miracle. The coin was all I had left. I thought about it constantly. I ran through every possible wish in my head over and over, trying to find one that would not backfire. I thought about wishing for money, millions of dollars, but then I imagined a mountain of cash falling from the sky and crushing me, or drowning in a sea of bills. Every wish had a dark side. I thought about praying for Mom's health to improve, but what if the boomerang twisted that into something worse? I could not risk it. I had to leave her out of it completely. Then it came to me. A house. A big, beautiful house somewhere warm. I would wish for a home that was already paid off, already in our name. No tricks, no loopholes, just a house. That night, before bed, I sat down and drew a picture. I sketched a house surrounded by tall trees with golden rays of sun pouring down over the roof. I added a swimming pool in the backyard. I placed the last gold coin on top of the drawing and closed my eyes and prayed. I prayed harder than I had ever prayed for anything in my life. The next morning, I felt different, lighter, almost hopeful. But when I walked into the kitchen, Mom was sitting in her wheelchair, sipping coffee, looking like she had not slept in a week. She told me flatly that I would be leaving when school ended. I asked her, "What about you?" She did not answer. I went to school that day feeling like the biggest fool in the world. The idea that a gold coin could save my family was ridiculous. I hated myself for believing in it. Then everything changed. The following week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to my mother. She opened it with shaking hands and read it 3 times before she could speak. Apparently, Grandpa had owned property in Gainesville, Florida. He had left it to some woman named Stella who had been renting it out to college students for years. Stella had recently passed away, and the property was now legally transferred to my mother. None of it made any sense. Grandpa never mentioned owning property. Mom never knew about any of it. But the paperwork was real. The lawyers confirmed it. And just like that, my prayer was answered. It took the entire summer to sort through the legal details and get everything in order. But when the dust settled, Mom had more than enough money to cover her medical bills. For the first time since Grandpa died, things were looking up. When school ended, we packed everything we owned into the back of a truck and drove to Florida. Mom thought about selling the house right away, but decided to live in it for a while first. Soak up the sun, feel some warmth on her skin. And the house was beautiful. It looked almost exactly like the picture I had drawn. Big yard, tall trees, swimming pool out back. My friends, all 3 of them, kept calling and asking when they could come and visit. For a little while, life felt good. Then the walls caved in. Not in some dramatic, all-at-once kind of way. It was slow and steady, like a leak you do not notice until the ceiling is sagging. By Christmas, it was clear the house was falling apart. The plumbing was a disaster. The paint was peeling off every wall. The crawl spaces underneath the house were infested with snakes. We needed to sell the place fast. Mom moved quickly, but not quickly enough. Before she could close a deal, some drunk college kid drove a car straight through the living room window. Mom nearly had a heart attack on the spot. She said the place was cursed. She was right. But I was never going to tell her why. I started doing some research on my own. I dug into Grandpa's past, his old contacts, his old haunts, and I found something. Jim, Grandpa's old road trip partner, was still alive. He was living in Georgia. I tracked down his information and reached out to him. He was suspicious at first, very suspicious. But after a lot of convincing, he agreed to meet with me. I drove to Georgia alone. Standing outside his house, I felt like an idiot. And what was I even doing there? What did I expect this old man to tell me? I almost turned around and left. But before I could, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was about my mother's age, tall and thin, with frizzy dark hair and a warm smile. She said she was Jim's daughter. She invited me inside and offered me some lemonade. I asked for water instead. She led me down a hallway and into a large bedroom. The room was something out of another era. Grateful Dead posters covered the walls. Lava lamps bubbled on the shelves. The color scheme was all flowers and tie-dye. Jim was lying in bed, watching a baseball game on a small television. He was a big man, heavy-set, with pale lips and large earlobes. Most of his hair was gone, replaced by red splotches across his scalp. He looked up at me when I walked in, and his face split into a wide grin. He said I looked just like my grandpa. We talked for a while. He asked me about school, about what kind of music I liked. I told him I was into the Dead, and he seemed genuinely pleased. He told me stories about the old days, about the road, about sleeping in the van and sneaking into shows. He was a warm man, full of laughter and memories. Then he asked me the question I had been dreading. He asked me what brought me all the way out there. I blurted it out before I could stop myself. I said the coins. The second the word left my mouth, everything changed. Jim's face went white. His eyes bulged out of his head. Drool spilled from his lower lip. His legs kicked against the blankets. He clutched at his chest with both hands, fingers clawing at his shirt. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a thin, broken whimper. And then he was gone. Just like that. He died right there in front of me, in a room full of Grateful Dead posters and lava lamps. I cried the entire drive home. After that, everything spiraled. The house continued to fall apart. Mom's health got worse. My hatred for Grandpa grew stronger every day. Those stupid coins had ruined everything. Mom managed to sell the house eventually, and the property turned out to be worth a good amount of money. But she did not live long enough to enjoy any of it. After her funeral, I was hollow, completely empty. I needed to get away from everything. At least money was not an issue anymore. With high school behind me, I decided to travel. I had met a girl named Cassidy who loved jam bands as much as I did, and she wanted to see the country too. So we bought an SUV and headed west. It was not as cool as Grandpa's VW microbus, but it was ours. We drove along the coast, slept in parking lots, ate cheap food, and went to every show we could find. For a while, I almost felt normal again. After about a month, we ended up in New Orleans. We were at a music festival, selling food and tie-dyed shirts out of the back of the truck to make extra cash. And that is when this story takes another terrible turn. Cassidy came running up to me one afternoon with a huge grin on her face. Her green eyes were glowing. She said she had met the most amazing old woman, a fortune teller named Pearl. The name hit me like a freight train. Cassidy reached into her purse and pulled out a small pouch. She opened it up and poured a handful of ancient-looking gold coins into her palm. She held them up to the light, turning them over in her fingers, admiring the strange markings and the bizarre lizard creature etched into the metal. She asked me if I thought they looked cool. My blood turned to ice. Story 3. When I was 8 years old, there were 5 houses on our side of Sycamore Lane. That was the first thing I checked when I came back. Not the old maple tree in the Culver's yard, and not the rusted storm drain where I used to drop pennies and make wishes. Not the cracked strip of sidewalk where Mrs. Wilkinson slipped one winter, broke her hip, and blamed every child on the block for running too loudly near the ice. Not the faded stop sign that had the word "Hammer Time" spray painted beneath its white lettering. No. I checked the houses and counted them multiple times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The same as before. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Because when I was 8, there were 5 houses on our side of Sycamore Lane during the daytime. But at night, if you knew where to look, there were sometimes 6. The 6th house was behind ours. Not behind it in the normal way, like across another street or tucked beyond a line of trees. It wasn't a guest house or a shed or one of those illegal garage apartments people pretend not to notice until property taxes come up. It was a whole house. A tall, narrow, old-looking house with a back porch, upstairs windows, and one yellow porch light that burned even when the power went out. It stood where our backyard should have ended, somewhere between the chain-link fence and the patch of blueberry bushes that marked the property line. It was too close and too far away at the same time, and that's the only way I can describe it. You could look out the kitchen window and see the whole thing, but if you opened the back door and walked toward it, the yard stretched, the grass became longer, the fence seemed to drift backward, and the night got quieter. It was as if every cricket, every passing car, and every barking dog had been packed away in cotton. We called it the house behind the house. Every kid on Sycamore Lane knew about it. None of the adults, however, ever admitted that they did. That was the first rule. Adults don't talk about the house behind the house. They will talk about anything else. Weather, mortgage rates, tree roots, the neighbor's dog, whether the school board should replace the gym roof, whether Halloween had gotten too scary lately. But if you asked any of them whether they had seen the other house, they would go still for half a second and then pretend they hadn't heard you. My mother would do the dishes louder. My father would say, "There's no other house, kiddo." My grandmother, who lived with us for 6 months after her stroke, crossed herself once when I asked her about it before telling me not to look out back after midnight. That was the second rule. Don't look outside after midnight. That was the first thing any adult ever told the kids on Sycamore Lane. Not directly, and not as part of some game, but as a matter-of-fact instruction, like telling a child not to touch a hot stove. But of course I did. All children do the thing they are told not to do when the warning comes without explanation. The first time I saw the house, I was standing barefoot on the cold linoleum in our kitchen, one hand on the sink, looking through the window above it. It was 12:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the microwave clock was glowing green beside me, and because I had woken up thirsty and still half dreaming. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the snores of my father drifting down the stairs. I filled a plastic cup from the tap, drank half of it, and looked out into the backyard. At first I thought one of the neighbors had left a porch light on. Then I realized the light was facing me. It hung over a back door that did not belong to any house on our street. The house itself was black against the sky, just a shape at first. It had a steep roof, a narrow second floor, dark windows, wood siding that was barely visible in the dark, and a porch with 3 steps. It was the kind of house you imagine in old photographs, the kind where every person in the picture is stiff and unsmiling. I stared at it for maybe 5 seconds before I noticed something move in the upstairs window. Not a face, just pale motion behind the glass, as if a hand were playing with the curtain. I dropped the cup, and the sound of plastic hitting linoleum seemed impossibly loud. My mother called from upstairs. "Anthony?" I turned from the window so quickly that I slipped in the water I had spilled on the floor. By the time my mother came down the stairs, tying her robe shut and squinting in the dim kitchen light, I was crying too hard to explain. She didn't look outside. That is what I remember the most. She saw the water on the floor. She saw me shaking. She saw the curtain over the sink still open. And she did not look outside. She just walked across the room, closed the curtain, and said, "I had a bad dream." I told her I wasn't asleep. She told me I was almost asleep. I told her there was a house. She told me there wasn't. I told her there was. And then her voice changed in a way I had never heard before. It became thin and careful. She said, "No, there is not." Then she made me sit at the kitchen table while she cleaned up the water. She gave me a paper towel for my feet and refused to scold me for the mess. But she didn't comfort me either. And when she took me back upstairs, she stopped outside my bedroom and looked down the hall toward the bathroom mirror. For 1 second, her face twisted with something like recognition. Then she turned the hall light on and left it on until morning. At school the next morning, I told my friends what had happened. There were 4 of us back then. Me, Greg Harrison, who lived 2 houses down and had a gap between his front teeth he could whistle through. Nicole Wilkinson, who lived with the woman who broke her hip and insisted we call her Mrs. Wilkinson, even though she was Nicole's grandmother. And Colin Langstrom, who didn't live on Sycamore Lane but cut through our yards after school because his apartment complex was on the other side of the drainage ditch. We were not brave kids. Not really. We just had the kind of free time that makes children stupid. When I told them I had seen the house, Greg went pale, Nicole got excited, and Colin called me a liar a little too quickly. Greg asked me if I saw the light. I nodded. He asked if it was yellow. I nodded again. He looked around the playground as though afraid teachers might be listening from behind the swings. Then he asked me if I had seen her. I didn't know who he meant, so he told me. Every neighborhood, I think, has a story that adults pretend not to know and children pretend not to believe. Ours had Old Mara. Some kids called her the back house witch. Others called her the woman behind. Nicole said her grandmother called her the house mother once in her sleep. But when Nicole asked about it the next morning, Mrs. Wilkinson said she had been dreaming about a soap opera. Greg said Old Mara lived in the house behind the house and only came out when a family had gone soft in the middle. That was the phrase he used. Gone soft in the middle. None of us knew what it meant exactly. Greg said it could mean divorce, or death, or fighting, or drinking, or secrets, or when nobody listens to kids anymore. Colin pointed out that this description covered almost every house in America, and that was when Nicole told him to shut up. According to Greg, Old Mara wasn't like a normal witch. She didn't ride a broom or wear a pointy hat, but she did wear a black dress or a nightgown or something like a funeral curtain. Her hair hung over her face and she had long hands. Sometimes she looked young, and other times she looked old. Other times still, she sounded like your mother. But you could always tell it was her by the feet. That was the third rule. Don't answer a woman calling from the yard unless you can see both of her feet. I remember asking why feet, and Greg just shrugged and said because she hides them when they are wrong. Children say things like that with absolute conviction. Nicole said there were other rules, too. If you see the porch light, close the curtains. If you hear knocking from inside a wall, don't knock back. If your hallway gets longer, don't run. If she offers you food, don't eat it. Never follow her downstairs. And the biggest one of all, if she asks if you want to stay, don't say yes. That was the one even Colin didn't joke about. I asked how they knew all of this. Nicole looked toward the teacher on morning recess duty before turning back to us. She told us her mom had a brother. She doesn't now. That was all she said at school. But later, behind the Culver's garage, where the blueberry bushes grew wild and bees crawled drunkenly over crushed fruit in the summer heat, Nicole told us the rest. Her uncle's name was Daniel. He'd been 10 years old when he disappeared. This was back in the 70s, before most of our parents had lived on Sycamore Lane. He and some other kids had been playing a game called Knock Knock Mara. I know that sounds stupid, but all childhood rituals sound stupid until one works. The game had to be played in a house with a back door and a mirror facing any hallway. You waited until everyone else was asleep, turned off every light except for one in the room closest to the backyard, then stood in front of the mirror, covered your eyes, and said the words, "Mara, Mara, morning mother, show the house behind the other." Then you knocked 3 times on the wall beside the mirror. Not the mirror itself, the wall. If nothing happened, you were safe. If you heard 3 knocks back, you were supposed to turn on every light in the house and not sleep until sunrise. If you heard a woman humming, you were supposed to cover the mirror. If you saw the porch light in the mirror behind you, you were not supposed to turn around. Daniel turned around. That is how Nicole told it. He turned around, saw the back door standing open, and walked outside. His sister, Nicole's mother, watched from the stairs and said he crossed the backyard toward a house she had never seen before. She said a woman stood on the porch. A tall woman in black with her hands folded in front of her, and her head tilted like she was listening to music no one else could hear. Daniel stopped halfway across the lawn. He seemed frightened. But then the woman lifted one hand and crooked a finger, and Daniel started walking again. His sisters screamed for their parents. Their father ran outside barefoot with a baseball bat, while their mother called the police, and the neighbors turned on their lights. But by then, the backyard was just a backyard, and Daniel was gone. There were no footprints past the fence. No hole, no loose boards, no signs he had climbed into another yard. Nothing. He was just gone. The official story was that he ran away. The unofficial story was that old Mara gave him a room. I asked what that meant, and Nicole didn't answer. Greg did. He said it means she kept him. That summer, we became obsessed with the legend of old Mara and the house behind the house. Children are horrible that way. Give them a story about a missing boy, a witch, and a house that only appears at night, and they won't respond with caution. They will respond with investigation. We made maps of the neighborhood, counted windows, and compared the backs of houses. We stole Mrs. Wilkinson's old Polaroid camera and tried to photograph the backyard after dark. But the pictures came out black except for the occasional pale streaks that might have been glare. Greg kept a notebook. He labeled the front cover as evidence before crossing it out and writing incidents underneath. Inside it, he wrote down sightings. Most were nonsense. June 8th. Colin heard humming behind the bathroom wall, probably pipes. June 14th. Nicole saw an extra window in the microwave reflection. Unconfirmed. June 21st. Anthony's hall felt longer. Fear response possible. Greg liked official-sounding words. His father was a volunteer firefighter and kept incident forms in a drawer. And Greg did his best to copy the tone. Then came the blackout. I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was July because the air had that thick, wet, electric feeling that summer gets when a thunderstorm has been threatening all day but refuses to break. The adults were irritable. The neighborhood dogs were whining, and cicadas were screaming from the trees. And then, at 9:43 in the evening, every light on Sycamore Lane went out. The whole street made that startled neighborhood sound in response. People opening doors, calling across yards, laughing too loudly, pretending not to be unnerved. Flashlights clicked on, a child cursed, and someone said a transformer must have blown. My father went outside with the other men to look up and down the street, as if the problem would be visible in the air. while my mother lit candles in the kitchen. I asked if I could go to Greg's house. She said no immediately. I said I just wanted to see if they had batteries. She said we had batteries. I said then maybe Nicole's house. She said no. I started to argue, and she said no again, and the way she said it made my mouth close shut. She looked tired that night. More than tired, really. She looked hollowed out. My parents had been fighting a lot that summer, late at night, in voices they thought didn't travel through the vents. My father had been sleeping in the den more often, while my mother had started cleaning things that were already clean. Maybe that was what Greg meant by going soft in the middle. At 10:30 that night, my mother made me go to bed. The air upstairs was hot and still. My window was open, but no breeze came through the screen. My room smelled like dust and sweat and the wax from the candle my mother had carried down the hall. She had placed it on my dresser, seemed to think better of it, and blew it out. She told me to try to sleep. I asked if she could leave the door open. She hesitated and then closed it halfway. Not all the way. Halfway. I lay awake in bed, unable to sleep, listening to the house breathe. That is how it felt without electricity. No humming from the refrigerator, no air conditioning, no television murmuring downstairs. Just wood settling, pipes ticking, my parents' low voices somewhere outside, and the faint insect hum pressing against the window screen. At some point, I heard knocking. 3 soft knocks. Not at my bedroom door, and not from downstairs, but from the wall behind my bed. Knock, knock, knock. I stopped breathing. A childish part of me wanted to knock back just to prove it was nothing. A mouse, a branch, the house cooling in the heat. But I remembered Nicole's face when she told us about Daniel. And I remembered the rule. If you hear knocking from inside a wall, don't knock back. So I did nothing. For a while, the wall went quiet. Then a woman's voice whispered my name. Not from the wall, but from outside. From the backyard? Anthony. It sounded like my mother if my mother were calling me from very far away through a tunnel. I sat up immediately. My bedroom was on the second floor at the back of the house. From my bed, if I leaned right, I could see a slice of the backyard through the window. Usually there was nothing out there but the grass, the fence, and the blueberry bushes. But that night there was light. Yellow light. A porch light. It glowed through my curtains, thin and sickly. The voice called again, and this time it sounded less like my mother. It sounded older and sweeter and just plain wrong. My body wanted to move toward the window. I mean that in the most literal way. My legs shifted under the sheets before I had even decided to get up, and my hands curled around the edge of the mattress. The voice wasn't commanding me. It was inviting me. An invitation is worse because some part of you gets to pretend it was your choice. I stood up, feeling the warm floorboards beneath my feet. The voice said she heard my crying. But I hadn't been crying. Not then, anyway. I walked to the window and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. The house behind the house stood just beyond our yard. It was closer than before. The porch light was on, and the back door was open. Through it, I could see part of the kitchen inside, or what looked like a kitchen. It had a wooden table, a hanging lamp, cupboards painted a dull green, and something steaming on the stove. A woman stood on the porch, tall and narrow and draped in black or dark blue. Her hair hung forward so I couldn't see her face. Her hands were folded over her stomach, and her feet were hidden behind the hem of her dress. That was enough for me. I let the curtain drop. As soon as I did, my bedroom door creaked loudly. I turned to find the door, which my mother had left half open, now standing wide open. The hallway beyond it was dark. Too dark. A blackout. Dark is never complete. There should have been moonlight from the bathroom window, shadows from downstairs candles, or at the very least some gray shape of the banister. But instead, the hallway looked as if it went on forever. The wall opposite my door, where there should have been family photos, seemed farther away than it should have, and the carpet runner stretched into blackness. The bathroom door was not where it belonged. Instead, there was another door, a narrow door at the end of the hall made of old wood. It had a glass knob and yellow light shining underneath it. From behind that door, a woman hummed. The tune was soft and almost familiar. A lullaby, maybe, or something pretending to be one. I didn't scream, but I wish I had. Screaming would have brought my parents. Screaming would have made things real in a way I could share. Instead, I stood there like a sleepwalker, while the door at the end of the hall opened inward. Not much, just an inch maybe. But it was enough for the yellow light to widen across the carpet, and for a hand to come around the edge of the door. The fingers were unnaturally long, with pale knuckles and nails as dark as old wood. Then came her voice. "You can come in if you like." I don't know what would have happened if my father's voice hadn't drifted upstairs at that very moment. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But from somewhere below I heard him say, "Hey, who opened the back door?" His voice broke the spell, and I ran. Not toward the strange door, but toward my parents' room. I ran so fast I slammed shoulder first into the doorframe and fell, right as my father was coming up the stairs with a flashlight, and my mother close behind him holding a candle. He asked what was wrong. I pointed at the hall and tried to explain about the door and the woman. But my voice trailed away as the flashlight beam swept over the corridor. It looked perfectly normal, short as it ever was with family photos on the wall, and a bathroom door exactly where it belonged. The narrow door was gone. The yellow light was gone. The humming was gone. But my mother wasn't looking at the hall. She was looking at my feet. And so I looked down too. They were caked in mud. Wet black dirt clung between my toes and smeared the carpet beneath me. But I hadn't gone outside. My father stared at the mud, then at my face, then at my mother. Nobody spoke. Downstairs, the back door swung open and closed in the wind. The strange thing was, though, there was no wind that night. The power came back at 3:12 in the morning. By sunrise, my parents had agreed that I must have sleepwalked. My father said the mind did strange things during blackouts, and my mother washed my feet in the bathtub, refusing to meet my eyes. When she scrubbed the mud from my toes, her hands shook so badly the washcloth slipped into the water. I worked up the courage to ask her who old Mara was. She slapped me. Not hard, not the way people slap in movies. It was quick and shocked, and more frightened than angry. Then she covered her mouth and started crying. She kept saying she was sorry. But she never answered my question. That should have been the end of it for me. I should have stopped playing detective, stopped talking about old Mara, and stopped looking out windows after midnight. But instead, I went to Greg's house after breakfast the next morning and found that Nicole and Colin were already there. Apparently, Greg had seen it too. Not the woman, but the house, and he had taken a picture of it. The Polaroid was lying on his bedroom floor when I arrived. The four of us sat around it like children in a movie summoning a demon, except none of us was laughing. The photo showed Greg's backyard at night. It was mostly darkness, a slice of fence, and the blurry white orb of his dog's water bowl. But beyond the fence, where the alley should have been, there glowed a porch light. It was just a smear of yellow in the photograph, but under it, standing in the shadow, was a shape. It was too thin to be Greg's mother, and too tall to be his father. The face was blurred by motion and distance, but it had one hand raised, not waving, crooking a finger. An unnaturally long, pale finger. Colin said to burn it. Greg shook his head and said they needed proof. Colin snapped back and asked proof of what? That they were stupid. Nicole started to say maybe if adults saw it, but I interrupted her. I told her they wouldn't. Somehow I knew it with absolute certainty. Adults could see mud on a child's feet. They could see open doors and missing sons. But they could not see the thing itself, not if seeing meant admitting it was real. Greg picked up his notebook. He said he had learned something. He had written down a new rule. A house only grows another house when someone inside wants to leave. Nicole asked where he had heard that. Greg didn't answer at first. His room was small and messy, full of action figures and library books and clothes his mother kept telling him to put away. His window faced the backyard, and the curtains were drawn closed, even though it was morning. I said his name, and he looked embarrassed. Then he told us she had told him. Nobody moved. Nicole finally whispered and asked if he meant the lady. Greg said she was outside after the lights came back. Not all the way outside, though. In the window. Then he pointed toward his closet door. It was open maybe 6 inches. Inside were hanging shirts, sneakers, baseball cards, and a laundry basket. Normal kid stuff. But I suddenly smelled something underneath the familiar scent of boy sweat and detergent. Wet dirt, old powder, and something sweet rotting in a covered dish. Colin asked what she had said. Greg stared at the Polaroid. She said she made a room for him. We should have told someone. I know that now. Hindsight is 20/20 after all. Even if the adults didn't believe us, even if they got angry and sent us to therapists and pastors and guidance counselors, we should have told someone. But children keep secrets because secrets make them feel powerful. And because sometimes deep down, they already know that adults are powerless too. The next week, Greg began to change. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. He just got quieter. He stopped whistling through the gap in his teeth and stopped making fake incident reports and stopped laughing when Colin did impressions of our gym teacher. At lunch, he stared past us like he was listening to something in another room. Once during recess, I found him standing by the fence at the edge of the playground, looking toward Sycamore Lane. He told me, she said, it wasn't bad there. I asked who, and he looked at me like I was being rude. He said there were rooms for everybody, rooms that fit right. I asked what that meant. He said it means you don't have to be scared in them. I told him he was scaring me. He smiled a little, and that was the worst part. He looked peaceful. He said his dad yells less there. I told him his dad wasn't there. He said he knew that, but the room knows what he sounds like. I grabbed his arm and told him not to go back there. His smile faded. He said he didn't think he was the one going back. I asked what he meant. He leaned close and said he thought it was coming forward. That night, my house felt smaller. At first, I thought it was because I was afraid. Fear changes distance. It makes bedrooms cavernous, closets bottomless, and hallways stretch. But this was different. The kitchen table seemed closer to the wall than before, and the den felt cramped. The upstairs hallway had always had 4 family photos on the left side, but now there were 3, and no one else besides me remembered the 4th. The missing photo had shown me at age 5, sitting on my mother's lap in the backyard. I knew because I used to hate that photo. I had chocolate on my face and my hair stuck up weirdly. When I asked where it went, my father asked what photo, and my mom dropped a spoon with a loud clatter in the sink. That was when I started sleeping with my desk pushed against my bedroom door. Not because I thought it would stop old Mara, but because I needed to pretend that I could. 3 days later, Colin found the key. It was on his kitchen counter when he got home from baseball practice. Long and black and old-fashioned, it was tied with a strip of faded ribbon. His mother thought it belonged to the landlord and put it in the junk drawer, but by morning it was on Colin's pillow. He threw it into the drainage ditch on his way to school. At lunch, it had reappeared in his backpack. None of us touched it. Greg said she doesn't give everybody keys. Colin punched him hard in response, and Greg went down beside the lunch table, with blood sliding from his nose onto his shirt. A teacher ran over to find Colin standing over him, shouting, "Shut up," over and over until they dragged him to the principal's office. Greg never cried. He just looked up at Colin as they pulled him away, his expression strangely calm, and said, "She made you a room, too." Colin's family moved 2 months later, which makes it sound like he escaped. Maybe he did. Maybe distance matters. Maybe old Mara is local, tied to certain streets and property lines and houses that have gone soft in the middle. Or maybe Colin was just luckier than the rest of us. I found him on Facebook years later. His profile was mostly locked down, but I saw that he had a wife named Casey, 2 kids, and worked for an HVAC company in Ohio. A perfectly normal life, at least from the outside. I almost messaged him once. I typed out, "Do you remember the house behind the house?" But then I deleted it. Some names you don't say into mirrors. Some questions are mirrors. Nicole lasted until October. By then, the school year was in full swing. The leaves were turning, and Halloween decorations covered every porch on Sycamore Lane. The quiet suburban street looked haunted on purpose now. Fake witches hung from trees, plastic skeletons sat in lawn chairs, and rubber spiders clung to windows. It made me angry, not scared. Angry. Everyone was laughing at the shape of something that had been watching us all summer. Nicole became convinced that her Uncle Daniel was still inside the house behind the house. She said she heard him. Not every night. Only when she slept with the window open. He would call her from the backyard and tell her old Mara was asleep, and he knew the way out now. He told her to bring scissors and salt and one of Mrs. Wilkinson's silver bells from the box of Christmas decorations in the attic. I told Nicole it wasn't Daniel. She said I didn't know that. I said it sounded like a trick. She told me everything sounds like a trick when you are scared. That was the last real conversation we had. On October 17th, Nicole Wilkinson disappeared from her bedroom. The window had been closed and locked. The bedroom door was blocked from the inside by her dresser, just like I had started doing with my desk. There were no footprints, no broken glass, no sign of forced entry, nothing except the wall behind her bed, which was damp. Not wet from a pipe, and not leaking, but damp like soil. According to Mrs. Wilkinson, who told the police all of this before denying it later, there were 3 knocks from inside that wall at 2:06 in the morning. Knock, knock, knock. The official story was abduction. There were search parties and flyers and police dogs and candlelight vigils. Adults cried in public and whispered in private, and my parents stopped letting me leave the house alone. Greg stopped coming to school altogether. For 2 weeks, Sycamore Lane was full of reporters, volunteers, squad cars, and neighbors carrying flashlights through yards that had never felt more exposed. But no one found Nicole. Then on Halloween night, I saw her in my mirror. I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom lights flickered. They didn't go out completely, just flickered. And the mirror over the sink darkened, as if the room behind me had lost all light. Then it showed a hallway that was not our hallway. It was narrow and wallpapered and yellow and wrong. And at the end of it stood Nicole. She was wearing the same purple sweatshirt she had worn the day before. She disappeared. Her hair was wet, and her face looked blank. Not dead exactly, but emptied. And behind her, a woman's hand rested on her shoulder. I noticed the long fingers and dark nails immediately. Nicole looked at me through the mirror and mouthed something. I couldn't hear her, but I understood anyway. Don't follow. Then the woman behind her bent down, bringing her hidden face close to Nicole's ear. And the mirror cracked from the top to bottom with a loud, sharp sound. My father took it down the next morning and cut his hand so badly on the glass that he needed 6 stitches. We moved in December, not because of the mirror, not officially anyway. My father got a job offer in another state, and my mother said we needed a fresh start. The house sold below asking price to a young couple with a baby, and another one on the way. I asked my mother once, while she was packing dishes and newspaper, whether we should warn them. She looked at me with a fury so deep and hopeless that it frightened me more than any witch. She asked me, warn them about what? I never brought it up again. And for a long time I believed that leaving Sycamore Lane saved me. I grew up. I stopped talking about old Mara. I told myself the mind of a frightened child fills in darkness with shapes. I told myself Greg Harrison had depression, and Nicole Wilkinson had been taken by someone human, and Colin Langstrom had found an old key we turned into mythology. I told myself my mother had been scared because fear is contagious, and the muddy feet and the mirror and the extra house were all just memory distortions. I told myself all of these things for years, and for years it almost worked. Story 4. It was not the real name of the mountain, and it was not the real name of the observatory, and it was not the real name of the nation whose land it sat on. That was deliberate. It was partly for privacy, and partly because the last thing anyone should want is for a story like this to turn an indigenous place into somebody else's nightmare. The woman writing this was not from there. She was a guest. The observatory existed because it had been permitted. Scientists were allowed to do their work on a mountain that already had a name, a history, and a significance that went back far longer than the telescopes. The state maintained the road. The university operated the facilities. The nation allowed the research to continue through a formal agreement. This relationship was explained to every researcher before each observing run, and the language was always institutional and careful, but the practical meaning underneath was simple. Stay on the approved paths. Do not disturb natural or cultural materials. Do not pick up artifacts. The rule was not complicated. Stay on the path. Do not pick anything up. She was writing this from the monitor room because she had done both of those things wrong, and now there were voices on the other side of the door asking to be let in. She did not know how much time she had. The Ethernet kept dropping, so she was writing it like a log. What the place was, what she did, what had happened since. If it posted, she asked that no one try to identify the mountain. She meant that. No guesses in the comments, no messages with names. Just tell anyone who works at an observatory, especially anyone scheduled for a summit run that week, not to go up. The road page was wrong. The weather page was wrong. If the cameras showed children outside after dark, do not open the door. She was an observational astronomer, which meant that every few months she left her ordinary desk life and went to live at a mountaintop facility to collect data from actual telescopes. She loved it. She was so introverted that the idea of only 3 other people on the summit for an entire week sounded lovely. No traffic, no errands, no forced social obligations, no phone reception, no constant buzzing from apps. If you needed someone, you used the walkie-talkies. Otherwise, the mountain was quiet. She was also 2 weeks away from defending her dissertation, which meant that technically she was almost a doctor, but emotionally she was a damp paper towel. Her mom kept calling her doctora, even though she had not defended yet. She kept telling her not to jinx it. Her mother obviously ignored her. Her mother also hated when she traveled for observing runs because in her mind every mountain was one missed phone call away from a true crime episode. Before she left, her mom asked if she had packed gloves, medication, extra socks, snacks, a flashlight, and a second flashlight because what if the first flashlight dies? The telescope she used sat inside a huge white dome several stories tall. The primary mirror was on the scale of several meters across, large enough that the first time you saw it moving, you understood why people used to put gods in the sky. Before every observing run, she had a tiny ritual. She would go up to the deck that wrapped around the dome, high enough that the access roads below looked like scratches in the rock, and she would watch the sunset while the dome opened for the night. The dome's slit would part slowly, and then the telescope would begin to slew for calibrations, its whole body turning with a heavy grace. Snow crackled under your boots if there was fresh ice. The air burned your nose. The horizon went gold, then violet, then black, and the first stars appeared before the last warmth had left the ground. It made her feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The dorm where they slept was a 20-minute walk from the big dome, close enough that the commute was a gentle stroll when the weather was good and like summiting Everest when it was not. The dome facility itself was built like a safe room. The entire interior was connected by red-lit hallways. Red light helped protect night vision, limited light pollution, and kept everyone from being fully blasted awake during night operations. You entered through an exterior door into a small lobby, then another door into a red hallway, then the elevator, then another red hallway on the monitor room floor, then finally the monitor room where they actually worked. The monitor room had the control consoles, camera feeds, a few rolling chairs, and a tiny kitchenette. The kitchenette was closest to the monitor room door, which meant it was also closest to the red hallway that led back to the elevator. Astronomers are not the best cooks, and the kitchenette reflected that. It had a microwave, a coffee machine, an electric kettle, and the usual observing run supplies. Instant ramen, hot cocoa packets, tea bags, plastic utensils, and too many paper towels. The mini-fridge was usually half full of takeout boxes from previous observers who were probably too tired to throw them away or forgot to bring them back down to the dorms. There were also water bottles with faded initials on the caps, old condiments, and a few unlabeled containers that everyone collectively agreed not to open. The whole place was truly a sequence of thresholds. Lobby door, elevator door, hallway door, monitor room door, weather outside, telescope inside, and them tucked into the warmest little box at the center. On her first day of this observing run, there was a group of children visiting the small museum near the summit. They must have been from one of the local schools. They were bundled into puffy jackets and beanies, moving in a bright little cluster behind their tour guide. She was coming down from the dome deck, carrying her laptop in her backpack, wearing too many layers because she was from Southern California, and definitely not accustomed to any level of cold. The guide pointed at her and said, "Look, there goes one of our astronomers." She was so startled that she forgot how to walk normally and sort of lurched past them like a Sasquatch in boots with borrowed snow spikes. The kids giggled nervously. One of them waved with both hands. She waved back and then immediately tripped on nothing. Tuesday evening, around 6:10. She started writing this as a record because she forgot her medication. She took an antidepressant and she had left it at home, states away, on her bedside table. She had asked her boyfriend to ship it to her before she went up the mountain. The delivery service was supposed to guarantee same-day arrival, depending on flight availability. But of course, the package decided it needed a grand tour around the country first. The road to and from the summit took about 3 hours in good conditions, including a mandatory stop to acclimate to the altitude. And they did not have good conditions. A wind and ice storm had moved in the day before, and tonight the summit forecast called for gusts around 80 miles per hour, with rain turning into snow and then freezing over everything in between. It was the worst possible combination. Wet first, then ice. The access road was now in that category of not officially closed to all vehicles, but no one being encouraged to try it, which was summit speak for absolutely do not make this someone else's problem unless you are literally dying. There were state vehicles on site, but even with chains and people who actually knew how to drive in that kind of weather, the ground between buildings was turning into a sheet of ice. The internet existed through Ethernet, but only intermittently. Her phone had no service except near one window in the control room, and even there it only worked if held at an angle. Her mom had already sent 3 texts asking if she was alive, which was her normal, so she was not worried. She sent back a quick reply and watched it fail to deliver. There were 4 of them up there: Marie, Daniel, Priya, and Mark. Daniel was the telescope operator. He had been there for years, and he was calm in the way that makes you immediately trust someone. Priya was another graduate student observing for a different program, and the only person Marie had ever met who brought actual vegetables to a summit run. Mark was facilities, which meant he appeared with tools whenever any of the red blinking dots on the control panel lit up. They moved around the facility mostly by walkie-talkie, heading to dorms, at the control room, checking generator shed. No notifications or casual texts. She loved it. The facility also had cameras everywhere, mostly for normal summit reasons. Weather, safety, checking access roads, and making sure no one was outside when conditions were bad. There were feeds from the dome exterior, the service yard, the road gate, the museum walkway, and the main entrance. The camera interface was oddly comforting. Tiny rectangles of the whole facility, all accounted for. Snow moving under lights, doors closed. No one where they should not be. The first glitch happened before anything else, which he was only realizing now. One of the feeds blinked from the dome exterior to the museum walkway for maybe half a second. Empty snow, empty railings, empty path. Then something small near the edge of the frame, half buried where the snow had blown against the curb, low to the ground. Still, she thought it was a rock or a dropped glove or one of those compression artifacts security cameras produce when the weather is bad. The feed corrected itself before she could tell. She did not mention it. There was nothing to mention. Tuesday, close to midnight. The seeing was better. The telescope was behaving. The guiding was clean. And if she had not been under-medicated, she would have been pretty thrilled. Daniel put soup in the microwave around 11:30, and the beep pulled her out of a missing interval. 1 second, she was watching the guider image, the screen that tells you if the telescope is pointing to the right spot. The next, she was standing near the back wall with her hand on the emergency stop panel. She did not remember getting up. Daniel asked if she was okay. She said yes. The symptoms so far were brain zaps, slight dissociation, jagged edges around objects, and auditory false positives in the wind. The last one was hard to explain. The summit wind sounded like it had structure. It hit the dome, dragged itself through vents, and pressed under doors in a way that sounded like speech. She kept almost hearing children outside, which absolutely made no sense. The museum had closed hours ago, and everyone had gone down the mountain before the storm came in. Wednesday, early morning around 5:30. She needed to write down what she did. The afternoon before the ice got bad, she walked the approved path between the dorm and the big dome. She had her laptop in her backpack, plus her notebook, charger, water bottle, 2 granola bars, and the emergency amount of cough drops her mom insisted she carry. The path was already slick in places, and she was walking like a newborn deer because she was fundamentally not built for ice. Near the bend by the smaller dome, her boot caught. She did that thing where you almost fall, overcorrect, and make it worse. Her backpack slid off one shoulder, hit the ground, and dumped half her life into the snow. She was obviously embarrassed, even though nobody was there to see it. She started grabbing things before the snow could cover them. Notebook, charger, granola bars, water bottle, her favorite pen that immediately tried to roll away from her like it had survival instincts. Near the edge of the path, half exposed where the snow had not quite covered the ground, she saw something small and stone-colored beside her things. She thought it had fallen out of her bag. She picked it up before she understood what it was. It was shaped by hand. She did not want to describe it too specifically because she did not know what it was, and she did not want to pretend she had the right to identify it. It was small enough to fit in the palm of her glove, broken at the base, with 2 shallow marks where eyes might have been. The only thing she could say was that to her it looked like it could have been a child's toy. Then she remembered the rule. Do not disturb natural or cultural materials. Do not pick up artifacts. She put it back. Well, she thought she put it back where it had been. The wind was lifting loose snow across the path, and the light was going blue, and her notebook pages were flapping open, and she was trying to keep her charger from sliding under the rail. She may have pressed it into the wrong patch of ground. She may have put it slightly too close to the path. She may have moved it more than she realized. When she stood up, she thought she heard a child giggle behind her. She turned around and saw only the dome, the path, and her own footprints already softening at the edges. Wednesday afternoon, around 1:20. She could not sleep. The dorm rooms were designed to block out all light and sound, which was normally wonderful after an observational run until sunrise. That day, the stillness felt trapping. At some point, she heard her mother in the hallway, calling her Marie Antonella. Nobody there knew that name. Marie was already a nickname for her name, Maria. Marie Antonella was her grandmother's name, what her mom called her when she was angry or scared. Not the kind of scared where you ask someone to text you when they land. Real scared. The kind where her voice gets low instead of loud. She opened the door and the hall was empty. Red light, carpet, closed doors. From somewhere very far down the hallway, she heard several children whispering. Wednesday evening, around 9:40. She finally told Daniel she forgot her meds. She kept it clinical. Missed doses, possible withdrawal, monitoring symptoms. He took it seriously, which she appreciated. He asked whether she was safe to work. She said yes. He told her to tell him if that changed. Then, after a pause, he said to try not to go outside tonight. She asked if he meant because of the ice, and he said yes, but he answered too quickly. Wednesday, just past 11 at night. They decided to stay in the dome facility instead of heading back to the dorms. The dorm was only a few minutes' drive away, but the storm made those few minutes a hazard. Rain had glazed the path first, then snow started collecting over it, so you could not tell where the ice was until your wheel found it. The wind was hard enough that the exterior railings hummed. Daniel told her that during one bad windstorm, Mark opened one of the sealed maintenance doors that leads outside, and the wind caught it so fast it broke his shoulder. He was out of commission for weeks. Mark turned red in the face and said not to bother with the state cars unless there was a medical emergency. because simply getting to the vehicle safely was its own problem, and driving down would be worse. So they were staying. Thursday, around 12:30 in the morning, Mark was missing, and he was not answering the radio. Daniel said Mark does not let his radio die. Priya said maybe he fell asleep somewhere, but none of them believed that. The telescope was parked because the wind was too high, so the three of them were in the monitor room pretending to be busy when they all saw the exterior camera feed flicker. The main entrance camera again showed the museum walkway instead. Daniel said that should not happen because they were separate feeds. The image was grainy with blowing snow, but there were children standing in a line outside the museum door. Maybe 8 or 9 of them. Winter jackets, hats. Little bodies turned toward the camera. One waved with both hands. Then the feed corrected itself and showed only the empty entrance. A few minutes later, they heard knocking from somewhere beyond the monitor room. Not on the monitor room door itself. Farther out. Past the red hallway, past the elevator, past the lobby, the exterior entrance. 3 taps. Not the way a person knocks when they are freezing. Daniel called Mark's name on the radio and got no answer. Then he left the monitor room and stepped into the red hallway. Priya and Marie followed him. They went down the red hallway through the door by the elevator, took the elevator down to the lobby level, stepped into another red hallway, and stopped at the inner lobby door. Past that was the small lobby. Past that was the exterior door. Daniel crossed the lobby and leaned toward the reinforced window beside the exterior door, then stopped. She saw it for less than a second. Her brain first tried to make it into Mark because Mark was the missing variable, and therefore the expected solution. Whatever it was, it had Mark's jacket. But it was too tall, bent under the top of the window frame, with a head or crown or branching structure that caught the red light in pieces. Antlers was the easy word, but not the accurate one. It looked like antlers translated through frost, radio antennae, bone, and bad reception. Its face was narrow and dark. Or maybe it did not have a face. She only knew it was oriented toward them. In one hand, it held the little stone toy. Then it spoke in Mark's voice and said, "Marie, you dropped this." Priya made a small sound. Daniel stepped backward into her. She said stupidly that she thought she put it back. The thing tilted its head. She did not see a mouth, but she knew it smiled. From somewhere behind it, outside in the storm, children started laughing. Thursday, around 1:12 in the morning, Daniel kept insisting they definitely did not see Mark, which was maybe true and for sure not comforting. They went back up to the monitor room after that. Through the lobby door, the red hallway, the elevator, the second red hallway, and the monitor room door, locking each one behind them. Daniel made coffee and forgot to put a mug under the machine. They stood there watching coffee pour onto the counter until Priya said his name. When Daniel turned, she saw something behind him or inside him. A pale forked shape above his head. It vanished when he moved. Reflection, probably. Thursday, around 2:30 in the morning. She thought she called for help. She remembered looking at the laminated emergency contact sheet posted on the inside of her dorm door, getting a woman on the line, and telling her she had missed medication and was having hallucinations. She remembered the woman asking calmly if Daniel was still Daniel. She remembered her voice breaking. Then the microwave beeped, and she woke, standing in the monitor room. Kitchenette, with her hand inside the empty microwave. The display said 0. Daniel was beside her holding a mug. There was no call in her phone history. No outgoing message. No record of the conversation. Priya said she had not left the monitor room. Thursday, around 6:20 in the morning, Daniel stepped out into the red hallway outside the monitor room a few minutes earlier saying he wanted to check whether the elevator was still working. She saw him through the narrow window in the monitor room door, standing in the red hallway facing the wall. The red hallway outside the monitor room led back toward the elevator, so he was not outside. He was still inside the dome facility, still protected from the storm, still close enough that they could hear him breathe if they stood near the door. She said his name from the doorway. Without turning around, he said, "She calls you Marie Antonella when she wants you to come home." Then he turned to her, blinked, and asked if he had said something. He looked toward the elevator and said he thought Mark came back. He tapped something in his jacket. It sounded like stone against glass. After that, he came back into the monitor room and sat with them for a while. None of them said much. She thought they were all pretending it had been a sleep deprivation thing. Thursday, around 12:10 in the afternoon. Priya barricaded the monitor room door with a rolling chair. This was after Daniel tried to leave again. He said he heard Mark calling from the exterior stairs, and before either of them could respond, he was already at the monitor room door with his hand on the handle. Priya tried to stop him. She grabbed Daniel by the sleeve, and he shoved her back through the opening hard enough that she hit the kitchenette counter. There was not much space for her to fall. She knocked over the electric kettle and a stack of instant ramen cups, and one of the forgotten water bottles rolled across the floor toward Marie. It stopped against her boot. There were initials written on the cap in faded black marker. She looked at the other bottles beside the mini-fridge. They had initials too. Were they forgotten, or instead left behind? In the struggle, Daniel's sleeve rode up. Under his skin, along the inside of his forearm, were dark branching lines like roots drawn under tracing paper. They got the door shut between them and him, locked it from the inside, and shoved a rolling chair under the handle. Locking him in the red hallway outside the monitor room sounded insane, but by then Priya and Marie were both afraid of him, and he seemed almost relieved to be on the other side of the door. When she asked Daniel about his arm, he answered from the hallway in a voice too young to be his own, and said he picked it up too. So those were the options. Stay in the monitor room. Open the door for Daniel. Try to get back to the dorms. The dorm meant the red hallway, the elevator, the lobby, the exterior door, and 20 minutes of ice and wind. Daniel meant Daniel, or whatever was answering for him. Staying meant listening to him breathe on the other side of the door. She did not want to name it. It was not hers to name. She kept thinking it was guilt making shapes out of weather and red light. She kept thinking it was her brain punishing her because she forgot her meds and picked up something she knew not to touch. She thought she had treated the rule like a rule and not like a warning. Stay on the path. Do not pick anything up. She did both wrong. She did not know. Daniel was breathing on the other side of the door, and something was breathing with him. Thursday afternoon, around 2:45, Daniel knocked on the monitor room door and asked Priya to let him in. His voice was normal at first, just tired and irritated. When she asked where Mark was, he laughed once and said, "Mark is maintaining the road." Priya whispered that the road was closed. Daniel said the road is full. Then he said in her mother's voice, "Marie Antonella, regresa, come back." Instinctively, she stood up. Priya pulled her back from the door. On the facility camera feed, the museum walkway appeared again. The same line of children stood outside in the snow, but this time, Mark stood at the front of the line facing the camera. Daniel stood behind him, even though Daniel was also speaking through the door, sometime after midnight, maybe Friday. The timestamps were still automatic, but she did not trust them. Daniel started singing in the red hallway for almost an hour, like he was humming to himself. Then the same singing started from the vent above the console. Same tune, same pauses, same tired shape of Daniel's voice. Priya looked from the door to the ceiling and whispered that it was not Daniel. The wind moved through the vent in a short, uneven burst. Under it, she heard a higher sound that could have been the ductwork changing pressure, or children laughing. The vent cover shifted after that. Something pale moved behind the slats, too briefly for her to identify it. Sometime around 2 in the morning, maybe still Friday. The microwave beeped. Priya was walking barefoot toward the kitchenette inside the monitor room, asleep with her eyes open. A few more steps, and she would have been at the door to the red hallway where Daniel had previously been standing for hours. On the camera feed, Daniel now stood at the far end of the exterior walkway, facing away from the camera. The same deck that wrapped around the dome, the same one where she watched the sunset before each observing run. His shoulders were raised, his head tilted back too far. Above him, touching the top of the frame, were the branching shapes. They were not attached to his head exactly, but they moved with him anyway. When he turned, one side of his face was still Daniel. The other side had dark lines running from his temple down his neck, and his eyes were red. Or maybe they were just reflecting the red hallway. She pulled Priya away from the kitchenette, shook her awake, and shoved the rolling chair back under the monitor room door handle. They thought about running, but there was nowhere useful to run. Outside the monitor room was the red hallway. Past that, the elevator. Past that, the lobby. Past that, the exterior door. Past that, the storm. The time would not load anymore. The Ethernet came back long enough to show the weather page, and it said clear. But the windows were white with storm. The road page said open. The summit camera loaded one frame before freezing. It showed the exterior door under a sky full of stars. Mark stood closest to the camera. Daniel stood behind him. Priya stood behind Daniel. Behind Priya were the children from the museum tour, lined up neatly in their winter coats, all of them looking directly into the lens. Behind them was something taller than the dome, its head branching into the dark in pieces that looked alternately like antlers, frost, antennae, and hands. Her phone showed a missed call from her mom, which should not have been possible because there was still no service. Then another one. Then another one. Missed call after missed call appearing on the screen, all from her, all time-stamped tomorrow. She tried to call back. The phone did not ring. It only played the sound of the microwave. No timestamp anymore. Someone was using the microwave again. Every beep moved her somewhere else. Control room, dorm, hallway, kitchenette, exterior door, dome deck, museum path, control room, dorm, hallway, kitchenette, exterior door, dome deck, museum path, snow crackling under her boots, children laughing, telescope slewing, dome opening, red hallway, her mother calling, no timestamp. She found her medication in her backpack. She knew she did not pack it. Her boyfriend had sent her a picture to confirm it was the right bottle before he shipped it to her. But the orange bottle was there. The name her mom called her was on the label, Marie Antonella. When she opened it, the pills inside were small stone animals, each broken at the base. No timestamp. The voices outside the monitor room had stopped asking to be let in. That should have been better. It was not better. Now they were reading the rules. Stay on the path. Do not pick anything up. Stay on the path. Do not pick anything up. Daniel was outside the door. Or Mark was. Or Priya was. Or her mother was. The voice kept changing, but the thing breathing behind it did not. She did not know how many days or nights she had been there. She did not know how many were left. The microwave beeped again. The rolling chair moved. Under the monitor room door, the red hallway light went dark, blocked by several pairs of small boots, standing very close together. She thought the children were opening the door. Story 5. I was sitting in my patrol car a little after midnight, parked on the side of a dark road just outside the city limits. My lights were off, the engine was low, and the only glow inside the car came from the dashboard and my phone screen. It was the kind of road I knew better than my own street. I had worked that stretch so many nights that I could have driven it with my eyes closed. Though after that night, I don't think I could ever drive it again, not even in daylight, without feeling sick. That road had a reputation. People left the city, saw the open stretch ahead, and decided that was the perfect place to press the gas and let their cars fly. Some did it because they were young and stupid. Some did it because they were bored. Some did it because they thought there was nobody around to stop them. The road led toward the highway, and drivers treated that long stretch like a runway. The problem was that it was dangerous in a way most people didn't seem to understand. On one side of the road, there were thick woods, deep and heavy, the kind where the trees grew close together and blocked the moonlight. On the other side, there was a wide field, open and low, with tall grass that moved like water when the wind hit it. Deer came out of those woods all the time. If you were doing 60 and a deer jumped into your path, that was enough to kill you. Maybe not every time, but enough times. We had seen wrecks. We had seen blood on the road and twisted metal in the ditch. We had put up warning signs and set speed traps, tried stronger patrols. And still, for some reason, people always sped up in that same section, especially late at night. The strangest part was where it happened most. Not right outside the city, not at the highway entrance. It was always 4 or 5 miles out, right where the last weak feeling of civilization disappeared. No shops, no houses, no gas stations, no streetlights, just woods on one side, field on the other, and a long road cutting through the dark. So that's where I would wait. I had a routine. I wouldn't stop people the second they left town. I'd let them settle in, let them think they were alone, and then if they opened up too much, I'd catch them around mile 4 and flip on the lights. It was easy work most nights. Boring, if I'm being honest, but clean and simple. Pull them over, get the license, write the ticket, move on. That night felt normal at first. Quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't notice it then. I was by myself, halfway paying attention to my phone, halfway listening to the sounds outside. The windows were cracked just enough for cool air to slip in. I could hear insects and the far-off rush of a truck somewhere on the highway. Nothing unusual. Then a car blasted past me so fast that my whole body jerked before my brain caught up. My radar jumped. 90. In that zone. I threw the phone down, started the car fully, pulled out hard, and hit the lights. It took me longer than it should have to catch him. He wasn't just speeding a little. He was flying like he was trying to outrun something. When I finally got him to pull over, I stepped out and walked to the driver's side. He was a young guy, maybe early 20s. At first glance, I thought he might be drunk or high. His face was pale, his hands were trembling, and his pupils looked so small they were almost gone. Sweat covered his forehead, even though the night was cool. I leaned down toward the open window. "Good evening, sir. Do you know how fast you were going?" He swallowed and nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry." His voice was thin and shaky. I studied him more closely. He kept looking past me, not at my uniform, but past me, toward the road behind my cruiser. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded again. Yeah, I'm okay." He was lying, or at least not telling me everything. I told him to keep his hands on the wheel and stay in the car. I ran him through a quick roadside check because I honestly thought he might be on something, but he tested negative. No alcohol, no obvious drugs. He was just terrified. I came back with a citation and handed it to him. He took it without really looking at it. His eyes flicked to his rearview mirror again, then to the side mirror, then back to the rear view. Trying to lighten the mood, I asked, "What were you doing running from somebody?" I expected him to laugh or at least give me a weak excuse. Instead, he went very still. His fingers tightened on the wheel. No, he said. No, just never mind. Never mind? He finally looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that bothered me more than the speeding. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't guilty. He looked like a man who had seen something that still hadn't finished happening. "Is this the beginning of your shift?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He took a deep breath, like he was trying to decide if he should say more. "Stay here, I guess. Just, I don't know. Check your rearview mirror sometimes. Don't go back toward town." I actually laughed. Just a short, confused laugh. "Yeah, okay." But he didn't laugh back. He just nodded once, put the car in gear, and drove away a little too fast even then. I stood there for a second after his taillights disappeared. Something about the whole thing stuck under my skin. Then I got back in my cruiser. Now I was facing away from the city. Woods to my left, open field to my right. No streetlights, no houses, no movement. Nothing but black road stretching behind me and my own face in the rearview mirror. And because that kid had said it, I kept checking the mirror. For the next half hour, I told myself I was being stupid. People get weird at night. Maybe he had an anxiety attack. Maybe he had seen an animal. Maybe he was just one of those people who scare themselves and then spread that fear to anyone who will listen. I had seen it before. Long, dark roads make the mind do strange things. Still, I kept glancing up at the mirror every few seconds. Nothing. The radio was quiet. The road was empty. The night felt colder than it had before. Then another car came past me, even faster. 100. I cursed out loud, pulled out, and went after it. This time the chase felt almost ridiculous because when I finally got alongside and saw the driver, it was an old woman. Gray hair, both hands gripping the wheel, eyes wide and fixed straight ahead. When she pulled over, she did it immediately, like she had been expecting me. I walked up and said, "Ma'am, do you know how fast you were going?" "Yes," she said before I could say more. Her voice was rough and breathless. "I know." She looked shaken all the way down to her bones. Her shoulders were tight, and she kept glancing over them as if something might be sitting in the back seat. "Couldn't let it catch up," she whispered. At first, I thought maybe I had heard her wrong. "I'm sorry. I couldn't let it catch up." There was no smile, no hint of a joke. Her eyes were wet with fear. "Who was catching up?" I asked. "What's down the road, ma'am?" She looked past me at the trees. "There are things that move through this world without ever being alive." I remember just staring at her for a second. That was the point where irritation and unease mixed together. Part of me wanted to write her off as another person with some strange belief, some late-night story, maybe dementia, maybe panic. But another part of me was listening in a way I didn't want to admit. I did my job. I got her information, wrote the ticket, told her to slow down. She took the paper with shaking fingers. Before she left, she looked at me one more time, almost with pity. Then she drove off. I sat in my car again and looked at the clock. It was close to 2 in the morning now. The road had gone dead. Not just empty, dead. Even the insects seemed quieter. My rearview mirror showed me only darkness and the faint line of the road cutting back toward town. Nothing was there. There couldn't be anything there. And yet a pressure had started growing inside me. Some deep animal warning that kept saying the same thing over and over. Leave. I didn't leave. Not yet. I told myself I was a cop on a night shift, not a kid in a campfire story. Still, I found myself thinking about the pattern. Why were people not just speeding, but panicking? Why all in the same section? Why all looking behind them? Why did that old woman and that young man, who had no reason to know each other, sound like they were describing the same fear? I was still trying to think my way through it when the third car came. This one wasn't as fast as the others, but still well over the limit. I pulled it over, almost out of habit, though by then curiosity had become the bigger reason. I wanted answers more than I wanted a citation. Inside were two teenagers, maybe 18 or 19. The boy was driving. The girl in the passenger seat had both hands over her face. Her shoulders were shaking. She wasn't crying loudly, but she was trying not to. I walked up to the window and skipped the normal opening. "What's going on?" I asked. "What's chasing you?" The boy turned to me so fast he nearly hit the window frame with his cheek. His face was white. "I don't know what the hell that was," he said. "I looked in my rear view and... Officer, He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. His breath was fast and shallow. Then he looked at me for 1 second, and right past me the next. His eyes widened. His whole expression changed from fear to full panic. His mouth fell open. Without another word, he slammed the car into gear, hit the gas, and tore away so hard his tires screamed. For a second, I just stood there in the dark, stunned. Then instinct told me to go back to my cruiser and radio it in, maybe chase them, maybe call for backup. But before I moved, I turned and looked down the road toward town. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed a movement far away, low on the horizon. Black against black. Something crossing where the darkness should have stayed still. It was too far away to make out, but it was there. Not a car, no headlights, no clear shape. Just motion where there should have been none. My mouth went dry. I got back into my cruiser, locked the doors, and started the engine. Suddenly, every training instinct I had felt small and useless. Move to a different position, I told myself. Get out of this exact spot. If nothing else, find another stretch of road with more traffic. I shifted into drive. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. For less than a second, something flashed behind me. To this day, I can't tell you what I saw. If you ask me whether it was a face, I can't say yes. If you ask me whether it was human, I can't say no. It was there, and then gone so quickly that my mind could not hold on to it. The only thing I remember clearly is the shock of seeing something where there should have been empty back seat and dark road. I blinked hard and checked again. Nothing. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I gripped the wheel and drove away. I went a mile, maybe 2, farther from town and farther from that stretch. Then I pulled over again, but only because part of me was ashamed of how rattled I had become. I sat there with the engine idling and tried to calm myself down. That feeling came back even stronger. Leave, not move, not relocate. Leave. I'd almost decided to do exactly that when another car came screaming past me. My radar lit up. 110. I remember saying, "Holy hell," out loud, then pulling out after him. When I got him stopped, I was already tense before I reached the window. The driver was a man in his 20s or 30s, plain-looking at first glance. Calm. Too calm. That was the first thing that felt wrong. After the last 3 drivers, his stillness didn't comfort me. It did the opposite. He looked at me with steady eyes. He didn't check his mirrors. He didn't seem scared. He didn't seem guilty. He looked as if he had rehearsed being a driver. I said, "What's out there?" He tilted his head slightly. "I don't know. I can't explain it. I just wanted to get away. I'm sorry." His tone was smooth but strange, like he was saying words that fit without fully understanding them. "License and registration." He handed them over. I glanced at the ID. Devon. I looked at the photo, then back at him. Something was wrong. Not in a dramatic way at first. Just wrong in a way my brain struggled to place. It was like looking at one of those pictures that almost look like a person until you study them. The face lined up in the broad sense. Eyes where eyes should be, mouth where mouth should be. But none of the details seemed to stay still. I couldn't find one feature and say, yes, that matches the photo exactly. He resembled the ID the way a dream resembles a memory. I bent down a little more and a smell drifted out from the car. Metal, rust, blood, maybe. It filled the air around the open window, thick and sharp. "Devon," I said slowly, "are you sure this is you?" He smiled. Not a normal smile. He pulled his lips back too far and showed all of his teeth at once. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I'm Devon." As he spoke, I noticed something else. His teeth stayed clenched together. The words came out anyway, slipping through them somehow. My skin prickled. I looked down without meaning to and saw his fingernails on the steering wheel. They were split in straight vertical cracks. Dark orange-brown matter sat underneath them, packed in deep. Rust, I thought. But no, not just rust. My eyes moved to the back seat. There was a pile there. Clothes, I thought at first. Maybe a jacket, maybe something thrown over itself in the dark. It had the shape of discarded clothing. "Why were you speeding?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "There's something dark and ugly in the woods," he said. "What is it?" "I don't know. It's ugly and it's dark." He said it so flatly that for one insane moment I almost believed he was just another frightened driver. Then he smiled again, teeth still pressed together. "Creeping in the dark?" I asked, and I don't know why I asked it that way. Maybe because my brain wanted to hear him say something normal. "Yes," he said. "Running in the dark, looking for people." My eyes flicked to the back seat again. The clothes were gone. There was nothing there. No jacket, no pile, just empty space. Every drop of blood in my body seemed to turn to ice. I stepped back from the window. "Stay put," I said. "I'm going to my car, and I'll be right back." He nodded too quickly. "Yes, okay, yeah. I will stay put here, on this seat, in the car. Just me. Really just me. It's just me here, I swear." I kept backing away. Then he blinked. I know people blink all the time. That was not what this was. It was too fast. Too many little motions. Like something trying to copy the act after only hearing it described. His face seemed to lose shape for a moment, and then settled back into itself. I reached my cruiser door. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly missed the handle. As I got in, I heard him whisper something. Not to me, I think. To whatever was inside the car with him. The words came in a quick, rushing stream, almost playful. "Don't worry. We'll find another slow one for you to catch, too." And from the back seat came the sound of heavy, eager breathing. I slammed the door, locked it, and drove. I didn't call it in. I didn't wait. I didn't look brave or professional or calm. I hit the gas and left that road as fast as I could without crashing. In the mirror, I saw his car still sitting there on the shoulder, perfectly still, as if it had never intended to chase me at all. That might have been the worst part. It didn't need to hurry. It was patient. I drove all the way to the next town. I found a motel that looked like it rented rooms by the hour and took one for the night. I barely remember checking in. I locked the door, dragged a chair under the handle, and sat on the bed until sunrise with every light in the room turned on. In the morning, daylight made everything feel stupid and unreal. I almost convinced myself I had let a series of frightened drivers get inside my head. Almost. But I could still smell that metallic odor in my nose, like it had settled into me. I could still hear the breathing from the back seat. I returned to my town after the sun was fully up. I told a version of the truth. I said I felt sick during the shift and needed to leave my post. I caught hell for it, but I didn't care. I never volunteered for that road again. I never took another night shift if I could avoid it. Some people thought I had burned out. Some thought I had gone soft. That was fine with me. A few days later, word came through about a missing person report. A man named Devon. His car had not been found. He had last been seen leaving a neighboring area late at night. When they showed the photo, I felt my stomach drop. It was the same license I had held in my hand. But the real Devon looked more real in that photograph than the man in the car ever had. Stronger features, clearer eyes, a face that stayed where it was supposed to stay. He is still missing. I have gone over that night more times than I can count. If you ask me what was on that road, I can't give you a name for it. I don't know if it came from the woods or if it only used the woods because people feared dark trees more than open places. I don't know if it was one thing or many. I don't know whether those drivers all saw the same shape in their mirrors or something different meant only for them. I only know there was a stretch of road where people began to run for no reason they could explain. And every one of them looked behind them like the dark itself had found a way to move. Sometimes I still wake up at night and think about that first young man, the one with the tiny pupils and the shaking hands. I wonder what he saw before he reached me. I wonder why he told me not to go back toward town, as if the thing on that road moved in a direction with purpose. I wonder whether he had already seen it in my mirror before I did. And I think about the old woman saying that some things pass through this world without ever being alive. At the time, I dismissed it as nonsense. Now I'm not so sure. Whatever sat in Devon's car and wore Devon's face did not feel alive in any normal human sense. It felt assembled, borrowed, like a bad copy trying to pass in low light. The detail that stays with me most is not the smile or the nails or the smell. It's the way it talked about people, the way someone might talk about prey. Another slow one for you to catch. As if the road itself had become a trap. As if fear made people drive faster, and driving faster made them easier to break. I have never told the story in an official report because there is no box to check for any of it. There is no code for a thing in the back seat that disappears when you look twice. There is no proper language for a face that seems almost human until it smiles. If I had filed it honestly, I would have lost my badge or my mind. Maybe both. So this is the only honest version I have. If you ever find yourself driving out of a city late at night, and the road opens up with woods on one side and a field on the other, and for no clear reason every part of you starts telling you to go faster, don't. Don't look too long in the mirror either. Keep your eyes ahead. Keep driving till you see lights and people and gas stations and something ordinary. And if someone coming the other way flashes their lights at you like they're trying to warn you, listen. Because I still believe there are places where something waits just beyond the reach of our understanding. Places where the dark is not empty at all. And if a driver named Devon ever smiles at you from behind the wheel of a car that smells like rust, don't ask questions. Just leave.